The SAS invented the modern kill house. Delta Force perfected it. During joint cross-training at Fort Bragg, British operators stood on the catwalks above a labyrinth of tire-lined walls, looking down to observe American assault teams run a complex, multi-room hostage rescue scenario. What they watched unfold was a level of violence of action that fundamentally altered the perception of close-quarters battle. The Americans moved through the rooms so aggressively and with such terrifying, seamless speed that some observers thought the drill had been meticulously choreographed and rehearsed in advance. But it hadn't been. This was not a rehearsed dance. This was simply the result of something the Americans had that few special operations units on Earth could match: unlimited ammunition, unlimited repetitions, and a CQB philosophy built entirely around speed, shock, and total dominance of the threshold. One former Allied operator later described training at Fort Bragg as entering an entirely different universe of resources. We are talking about entire aircraft fuselages parked on the range, full-scale multi-story urban compounds, specialized shoot houses designed to be rearranged daily. Thousands upon thousands of live rounds burned by a single squadron every single week. The goal for these operators was not just accuracy. In the Tier 1 world, elite units all have accuracy. If you are in the SAS or Delta, putting 2 rounds into the T-box of a paper target is the absolute bare minimum baseline. The goal was speed without hesitation. It was the complete eradication of the human instinct to pause. To truly understand how Delta Force reached this terrifying level of proficiency, you have to understand exactly where they came from. You cannot talk about the history of United States Special Mission Units without paying absolute respect to the godfather of them all, 22 SAS. In the early 1960s, a Green Beret officer named Charlie Beckwith served as an exchange officer with the Special Air Service during the Malayan emergency. What he saw in the jungles alongside the British completely rewired his brain. He saw a unit that operated with a ruthless, quiet efficiency, stripped of the heavy, lumbering conventional military bureaucracy that plagued standard infantry units. He watched small, highly autonomous patrols dismantle much larger forces through discipline, brutal fitness, and superior tactics. When the global terrorism wave hit its peak in the 1970s, culminating in aircraft hijackings and ambassador takeovers, Beckwith knew America was completely unprepared to handle a localized, surgical hostage crisis. He fought the Pentagon for years to create a dedicated counter-terrorism unit, and when he finally got the green light, he modeled first SFOD-D directly after the SAS. The grueling selection process in the Appalachian Mountains, the flat rank structure, the quiet professional ethos, it was all British DNA injected into the American military apparatus. The SAS had essentially written the Bible on modern hostage rescue. They proved their undisputed mastery of the trade to the entire world during the 1980 Iranian embassy siege in London, blasting their way into the building in broad daylight and saving the hostages. So if the SAS wrote the book, how does a student eventually shock the teacher? You don't do it by rewriting the doctrine, you do it by industrializing it. This is where the story shifts from a matter of tactics to a matter of sheer logistics and national resources. By the mid-1980s and into the 1990s, Delta Force tapped into the bottomless, unchecked well of the United States defense budget. They didn't just build a kill house at Fort Bragg, they built a localized, highly controlled war zone. Imagine breathing in the acrid smell of cordite and pulverized lead for 8 hours straight. The floors of these shooting houses were literally ankle-deep in 5.56 and 9mm brass casings. Operators were pushed to the absolute breaking point of physical and central nervous system exhaustion. They would run a complex, live-fire room clear until their hands shook from the adrenaline and fatigue, and then the instructors would tell them to reload their magazines and run the house again. While Allied units in Europe were often restricted by tighter post-Cold War budgets, severe range limitations, and strict ammunition allocations, the Americans turned close-quarters battle into a relentless live-fire science. If an operator demonstrated a slight inefficiency in how they dropped their rifle to transition to their sidearm, or if they took a fraction of a second too long to clear a deep corner, they didn't just drill it a dozen times to fix the habit. They shot thousands of rounds until the muscle memory was so deeply embedded into their forearms and shoulders that it bypassed conscious thought entirely.
It was a total obsession with repetition. The psychology of this training was not about learning how to clear a room. It was about learning how to clear a room faster than the human brain could consciously process fear. Because of their shared history and mutual respect, the SAS and Delta frequently conduct joint cross-training exercises. It is an exclusive brotherhood, but it is also a deeply competitive, alpha-driven environment. You have the absolute apex predators of the military world standing in the same room, silently watching each other work, judging every micro-movement. Accounts from Allied operators who trained at Bragg described an atmosphere of intensity that was difficult to comprehend. When the British operators stood on the observation catwalks above the Fort Bragg shoot houses, they looked down to observe the American assault teams stack up on a breaching door. The timer buzzed. The explosive charge detonated. What followed was a masterclass in aggressive entry. There were no pauses, there was zero hesitation at the threshold, there was split-second instinctual target identification. In CQB, the threshold is the open doorway. Tactically, it is known as the fatal funnel. It is where you die. The natural human instinct, hardwired into our survival biology over millions of years, is to pause, just for a microsecond, before stepping into an unknown dark room to assess the threat inside. Delta had trained that biological instinct entirely out of their operators. When the door blew open, they flowed through the fatal funnel like water breaking through a collapsed dam. The shock from the veteran observers on the catwalks wasn't that Delta hit the targets, as established elite units do not miss. If you were in the SAS, seeing a man sprint into a room and double-tap a paper target is not a novelty. The shock was how little time existed between the rooms. Doors exploded, deep angles collapsed instantly. Threat targets disappeared before the smoke even had a chance to settle. Before the observers on the catwalks could fully process the geometry of one room being dominated and cleared, the American assault team was already flowing rapidly into the next corridor, setting the next charge and breaching the next threshold. It was a seamless, violent, unbroken wave of action. There was a profound mental cliff here for the observers watching from above. How are they moving this fast without killing the hostage targets, or worse, accidentally shooting each other in the crossfire? When a four-man stack moves at that extreme velocity with live ammunition, the margin for error is absolute zero. If the number 2 man trips, or the number 3 man misreads his sector of fire, a teammate dies. But because of those thousands of hours of agonizing live-fire repetitions, the American operators possessed an unnatural spatial awareness. They knew exactly where their teammates were in the room, not by looking at them, but by relying on peripheral vision, the sound of their boots on the concrete, and a telepathic understanding of the team's momentum. It was too fast to track. They missed nothing.
Why does this extreme, almost reckless-looking speed actually matter in the real world? Why not be slow, methodical, quiet, and perfectly safe? Because in the grim reality of modern hostage rescue operations, milliseconds dictate who comes home and who ends up in a body bag. When an explosive breach goes off on a target compound, the assault team has roughly 0.8 to 1.5 seconds before the enemy overcomes the physiological shock of the overpressure blast. That tiny fraction of time is your only window of survival. If you are slow, if you meticulously check your corners from the hallway, the enemy regains their bearings, realizes exactly what is happening, raises their weapon, and executes the hostages. Delta's entire operational philosophy in these environments is built on the concept of violence of action. In the kill house, speed is security. If you are moving so violently, so aggressively, and with such overwhelming kinetic force that the enemy's brain cannot process your physical location, you effectively overload their OODA loop, the cognitive process of observe, orient, decide, and act. By the time the terrorist figures out there's an American operator in the room with him, he already has 2 rounds in his chest and 1 in his head. It is a psychological weapon deployed just as effectively as a kinetic one. You aren't just shooting the enemy, you are short-circuiting their central nervous system through sheer speed. The SAS gave Delta Force its foundation. They provided the original blueprint, the tactical doctrine, and the golden standard of what an elite Tier 1 unit should look like in the modern age. The Americans will always owe that lineage to the British. But America's vast resources, unmatched scale, and utter obsession with live-fire repetition pushed the unit into something different entirely. It wasn't reckless, it wasn't louder, it was just faster. And in the unforgiving geometry of close-quarters battle, speed is usually the only difference between a successful hostage rescue and a massacre. In the world of Tier 1 operations, there are no trophies for second place. There is only speed, precision, and the brutal reality of who dominates the room first. If you want more deep dives into the world's most elite special operations units, joint exercises, and the moments that built their legendary reputations, subscribe to Spec Ops Legends, because the stories the public sees are usually only the surface.